would see Heretics of Dune, and I'm like, dang it. I was so attracted by what my memory was. A few more years passed by. I think it was 85. All of a sudden, I see Chapter House Dune, and I'm like, dang, there was something about it was either the memories that I retained from a partial read, or it was the artwork itself. There was it was the description on the back. I had to do this.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Vince Salerno Podcast. This is episode 78. As always, I'm your host, Vince Salerno. I am really excited to share this episode with you guys today. This is an interview I got to do with somebody who has been in the journalism sphere for a long time and whom I've become really good friends with as of recent. This is, of course, Steve Baker. He is an independent journalist. He now works for Blaze Media. He's been reporting on January 6th and some of the lies that have been told about what happened that day. Right now, he's in a very hefty legal battle with the federal government right now. So please keep him in your prayers and consider supporting him by following him on Twitter, following his writings and his work, and sharing and getting the word out about his story, because he's a phenomenal human being. Just one of the nicest people I know, one of the greatest storytellers I know. I just can't say enough great things about Steve Baker, and I'm so grateful that he had the time to come on to this podcast to not talk about January 6th. For those of you who may not, those of you who know Steve may not know this, Steve is a huge fan of Dune, the Frank Herbert novel that has obviously spawned the film franchise that has revitalized the brand itself. We had a great conversation talking about everything Dune, from the books, from Frank Herbert himself, from the various attempts to adapt Dune into a movie. There have been other attempts, in case you didn't know that, beyond Denis Villeneuve and David Lynch's versions of the story. We also talk about just like amazing, really fun stories about how Dune got published, who published it. He won't admit this, but he is the closest thing I know, at least, to a walking Dune encyclopedia. It was so fun to pick his brain and have him share all these stories and all these experiences he's had with Dune. The conversation was so vast and so long that it ended up going almost 3 hours. So I don't know if this is going to be a 3-part interview, but this is definitely part 1 of the interview. So when part 2 comes out, that might be the only other additional part that comes out. But if when I get into it, it becomes too long, it'll definitely be a part 3. So I think I've talked him up enough. I'm just going to cut right to it, guys. Please enjoy my interview with Steve Baker on the rise of Dune. Steve Baker, welcome.
Morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, nice to be with you. Oh, look at that Mark Hamill cup right there.
Yeah. Sad sight. Yeah, I guess let's get started with that. What are your takeaways from that horrible sight we had to witness yesterday?
That was, it was cringeworthy. It was embarrassing. I don't know what the purpose for that was.
Other than that we're in an election year.
Yeah. Well, look, Hamill, let's be honest. Hamill is a one-note samba. He is a one-hit wonder. And he's not been he's not been all that credible since his time, in the first three Star Wars movies.
Hmm.
Uh, his comeback was not that memorable either, to that, universe, and certainly nothing he did in between was noteworthy. But then to march him out in front of the White House press corps, I just didn't get it. I didn't get
Yeah,
it at all.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, outside Luke Skywalker and the Joker, he's really he's yeah, he hasn't done much. And to his credit, he tried to speak out against his treatment in the sequel films, but I feel like once he realized the type of attention he was getting from that, he almost backtracked and was like, "Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm grateful to have been part of it altogether." And it's just like, no, you should be upset because we, the fans, were upset.
yeah,
That was not the Luke Skywalker most people wanted to see, and I don't care who you are. If you try to defend those movies, it was just not for me.
yeah. No, that's exactly right. Did you like any of the sequels?
I actually have a soft spot for The Force Awakens just because at that point, Star Wars was in quite a drought, and to be excited for Star Wars or look forward to something was
Mm,
actually very exciting and cool. I remember my brother and I, we were geeking out about this stuff. We got tickets to see it at midnight when that was still a thing.
yeah,
So I have fond memories of The Force Awakens, and I know people criticize it being a soft reboot of the franchise, but
yeah,
or a soft remake of the first original movie. But I think that was kind of the shot in the arm the franchise needed to get normies and diehard fans back on board to after the drought that we had been going through. So, and
yeah.
I even think some elements in the Rise of Skywalker were fun to watch or more entertaining to watch, but just executed in the worst way possible.
You didn't like Rogue One?
Oh, well, I mean, if you're talking about outside the sequel
Oh,
trilogy, yeah, I liked Rogue One. I know people kind of poo poo on it, but I think it was a fun, Dirty Dozen style, like offshoot. And I mean, it was a great prequel to the original Star Wars. Like I thought, it has nothing to do with the story of Luke or Leia, but it is sort of like the origin story of the rebellion in some ways. If you're
yeah,
going into that first Star Wars movie, so yeah, no, I really enjoyed Rogue One. I don't think it's perfect, but
yeah. Well,
it's a good.
outside of the first three movies, obviously Episode 4, 5, and 6, Rogue One's the only one I care about. That's it. I really enjoyed Rogue One. If they just did that prequel and left us alone, I'd be a happy camper.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It was a nice one off. In a world where I didn't think like a one off prequel. Like I was like, let's just stick with the sequels and let's just keep moving forward. We don't have to go back in time. And then I saw it and I was like, okay, that was actually kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I thought it was very well done.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, yeah. So we're recording this on May the 4th. So happy May the 4th to those watching. Or if you're watching, you're probably watching this days after May the 4th. But
Yeah.
whatever. Okay.
If you're in Russia, you might be watching a May Day celebration or something over there right now as well. So,
Yeah, exactly. You're an independent journalist, and you've been in the news for sort of poking the bear, so to speak, with the federal government and your involvement with January 6th. For those who may not know, can you give us a brief description of what's happening and what you're going through currently?
yeah, I mean the 60-second elevator pitch is just this. I was there on January 6th. Myself and another colleague, a writer, we went to cover the event that day, not knowing what the event would be, what it would turn into. I think maybe there were a couple of hundred people that had an idea of what it might be that day. I certainly wasn't privy. I wasn't one of those, and neither was my colleague. And we attended the rally. It was a flop, in my opinion. I wasn't a big Trump fan to begin with, and I thought it was a very, very underwhelming experience. And so about halfway through the speech, because the audio was so bad where we were and we couldn't see anything, that we decided to start working our way over to the Capitol, because there were planned events there. There were actually scheduled, licensed, permitted events on the Capitol property that day. And thousands of people would be making their way that way. So we decided to get ahead of the crowds and work our way that early. And so that's what we did. And unfortunately, by the time we got there, all hell had broken loose. And then it was just a matter of following, instincts at the time and following the story where the story went. I ran up to the battle line, started videoing the violence on the West Terrace, on the west side of the Capitol. And my colleague and I got separated throughout that entire process. And I, sometime after 2:00, there was a break in the lines, and people started surging up the stairs there to the upper terrace area. And I fell in line with that crowd that was going up. And then I looked, and there's open doors and police were standing down, and I went inside. And I did my, I thought I was doing my job. Myself and 60 other journalists did. And only, a small handful of us have actually paid the price for doing that up to this point. So, and you can, look, you can speculate all you want, but the reality is that the only ones of us who are paying the price for that are those of us who either work more on the right-leaning side of the political spectrum or submit our stories with that slant or whatever. But if I had walked in and I had taken the same exact videos that I took that day, and then I submitted my first story, and I called my first story, let's say, among the insurrectionists, like Luke Mogelson of the New Yorker did, then I probably would have never even heard from the FBI. But that wasn't the narrative that I submitted. So here we are today, and now I'm with the Blaze with Blaze Media. And I'm having fun meeting guys like you and doing what we're doing. But as you said, the aftermath is that I have been charged. I have been charged with 4 misdemeanors, the same basic 4 misdemeanors that all of the low-level, nonviolent defendants are charged with. But unfortunately, I've got to go through the legal process now dealing with all that. I self-surrendered, basically was arrested, marched before a magistrate in leg chains. My perp walk video has been seen by millions upon millions of Americans, whether they knew it was me or not. And then even just this morning, I got the government's response back from our first motion that we filed arguing against some of my pretrial restrictions. So I'm in the middle of a legal battle now. So here we go. It could last months. It could last years. So we'll see where it goes.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I've said this to you before, but I'm so sorry that all this is happening to you. Yeah, you're a phenomenal journalist. I've had the pleasure of working alongside you these past few months, and the work you put into your findings and the videos we've done is incredible. And I'm praying for you. I know a lot of people are praying for you, and I encourage my audience as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. All right.
Of course, yeah. And so now we're getting that out of the way, because this is all to just distract you and take you away from all the craziness going on in your life, to talk about something that's you're very passionate about. I've only recently gotten into in the past couple of years, and that's Dune, the phenomenal story from Frank Herbert. This is my copy right here. I got this from my brother for Christmas. I'm not sure the specific edition this is, but it comes with a introduction by Neil Gaiman. And yeah, just a phenomenal read. At least compared to people like me, you are quite the walking Dune encyclopedia. Can you tell us where?
There is a Dune encyclopedia.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there is.
No, there's an actual Dune encyclopedia. It was written by, let's see if I get his name right, Willie McNally, and he was a friend of Herbert. He was a scholar himself. McNally was, and he basically had got permission himself directly from Frank Herbert to put the encyclopedia together. And so it was, I don't remember the publishing date of the encyclopedia. I know, if I remember correctly, it was not, I don't think all 6 books were written yet when McNally published it. I may be wrong about that. He may have even done an update after Herbert died in 86. But I seem to recall that it was not complete. It was like, maybe 4 books in through not Chapter House, God Emperor of Dune. That's my memory, because I'm going back 30 years ago, because I actually, back in the old AOL science fiction chat rooms, I actually met Willie McNally and Dr. Willie McNally, and I think he was a professor out at I want to say, either Stanford or Sacramento State. I don't remember. It was California University. I should have looked all of this up in advance, but I actually established a relationship with him at the time online, and we chatted a lot, and we were sending back notes. And this was several years after Herbert had died, so I felt like I had a firsthand connection directly to Herbert. And I would ask him thoughts about Herbert, what Herbert would have thought about my thoughts about certain aspects of his books and things of that nature. And he was always very, very gracious, McNally was, in answering these. But the Dune Encyclopedia, interestingly, included just tons and tons of history that preceded, of the Dune universe. And the only place that McNally could have gotten this from was directly from his friendship with Herbert himself. So he was getting this. Now, there was, as they, regardless of whether you're talking about Star Wars, Star Trek, or the Dune universe, there's the what they call the canon nerds. That it must, everything must line up exactly. And for a while, until Herbert's son, Brian Herbert, and Kevin J. Anderson started writing sequels and prequels and midquels and everything else to the Dune universe and expanding upon Brian's father's work. The encyclopedia was generally considered canon, or it was the gospel. But as they began to put their expansive notes and additions to Herbert's universe, then various aspects of the Dune Encyclopedia were no longer canon. So there we go. And that's for all the nerds out there that know what that means. But I read the Dune Encyclopedia, and it's quite a read in and of itself. It's a rather expansive, as I said, work, expanding upon what Herbert had written up to that point, obviously coming from Herbert's notes themselves. And so it was an enjoyable read for me, being a bit of a Dune nerd even back then.
That's cool. Yeah, I'll have to look into that, because I was blown away just reading the book, just how much lore and how much thought is put into the world building of the world. I mean, it's on the level of it maybe even debatably precedes the work of Star Wars, because it's so expansive and so detailed and meticulous, and it's really it makes it a really enjoyable read for someone like me.
You know that all of Star Wars was stolen from Dune.
I didn't know that.
You did not?
No.
Oh no! I hate to.
It stands to reason that George Lucas borrowed from a lot of. I mean, he was borrowing from Flash Gordon and stuff like that. But I guess it probably stands to reason that he probably stole some things or borrowed, however you want to put it, from Dune. but no, I've actually never directly
What
heard
was
that before.
what was the desert planet in Star Wars?
Tatooine.
Yeah, and who were the Sand People?
I think they were just the Sand People. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
they weren't called the Fremen. And what showed up in the third movie in the desert?
Oh my gosh, the sand pit, right? Yeah.
The worm. Yeah,
Wow. So it's
I
just
can
a repurposing
I
of
can
Dune.
keep going here. I can keep going here. Then
Wow.
you had the whole idea of the Jedi, and yet Paul Muad'Dib was the Kwisatz Haderach, and he was the one that could see into the future and the different futures. He had the eye to see where nobody else could, and so there were parallels there with. I would say that the Jedi actually probably were more borrowed from the Bene Gesserits because they had the voice. You know,
Mm-hmm. The
these are
Jedi
not
mind trick and all that.
these are not the robots you
The droid
see.
you're looking for,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
and so this is a direct borrowing from the voice, of the Bene Gesserit.
That's fascinating. Wow. I'll have to my wife and I are rewatching Star Wars tonight, so I'll have to look at it with that lens now.
Yeah, and I'm sure. Look, like everything else, I'm sure that there's probably a wiki page on just the comparisons of Dune and Star Wars. I know that people have done that, so it's out there. It's online somewhere.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that. But yeah, no, I mean, just everything you've just said in such a short amount of time, you've already shown how big of a fan you are. I'm curious, when did your love for the Dune universe begin?
I will. This is a bit of a confession because I'm embarrassed by this. There have been many times in my life where I have started a book and didn't finish it. And Dune, as a teenager, was one that I started. I honestly don't remember why I didn't finish it. I don't know if I was in the middle of it and we moved somewhere and I lost it. I was a huge science fiction fan as a kid, and so I loved. Most of my books were either biographies. I had a lot of sports biographies. I had a lot of history. I loved history, and I love science fiction. And so at some point, I don't even have I don't have it anymore. So I'm thinking maybe it was lost or something. I just don't recall. But now fast forward. So this was probably early to mid 70s that I acquired and began reading it. Lost track of it, forgot about it, and then over subsequent years, and I'm talking about the next 2 decades, I would walk into bookstores and what they have they call their end cap where the new releases are being published or that sort of thing, on display. And then I would see, because I think Dune was published in 65, and then Dune Messiah was 69. So these preceded me, and then Children of Dune I think was, I'm guessing, 73, something like that. And then there was a little bit more time between the next 3 in the series. But what I remember would be walking into bookstores and seeing God Emperor of Dune, and then I would be, and I remember I would pick it up and I would thumb through it, and flipping pages, looking at the cover, holding books like we used to. That used to be a sacred thing. It's like holding an album cover, but holding a book in your hands. And I would see Heretics of Dune, and I'm like, dang it, I was so attracted by what my memory was. And and at this time in my life, so by this time in my life, I'm an adult and I'm on the treadmill of life. I'm doing other things. I'm active. I'm like completely immersed in the world of music, and that was the thing that most occupied my time. And And then, a few more years passed by. I think it was 85. All of a sudden I see um, Chapter House Dune, and I'm like, dang, I kept having this visceral reaction to every new book that came. There was something about it was either the memories that I retained from a partial read, or it was the artwork itself. There was it was the description on the back. I had to do this. And so finally, in my now I'm fast forward to the early 90s. I'm in my 30s now, and I am actually touring in music with an act that is full time on the road. It's a band. I wasn't playing in the band. It was a band I was actually managing, and look, one of our stops on the road somewhere, I walked into a bookstore deliberately and bought the first book of Dune, not all 6 in the original series. I just bought the first one, and I started reading it on the tour bus. And I don't remember how many days later, but basically I was about halfway through book 1, and we stopped at another bookstore somewhere in some city somewhere here in America, and I walked into a bookstore and bought all 5 of the remaining copies, remainder of the series. So I had not even finished number 1 yet, and I bought the other 5 in the original series. And so that was then for the next couple of tours that we did with this band. You know how I spent my time on the tour bus was reading through all 6 of the Dune books. And I read them all in one shot, straight through, with no interruptions, nothing else, no years in between them or anything else. So that was my, it certainly wasn't my initiation, because obviously before that, I had become very familiar with the Dune movie, and the 84 Dune movie was almost like a surrogate for me, for not having finished the book in my teens. And so this was the other thing. Remember what I said earlier, that if you had no familiarity with the book whatsoever and you walked into Dune 84, you probably walked out of there going, what in the heck did I just see?
Yeah.
Not everybody had that. A lot of people really enjoyed it the first time. So what I ultimately did as a result of the Dune movie, the Lynch version in 84, I bought back then the VHS tape, and then eventually I bought the DVDs, and I bought the reissues with the expand. There were people that were doing expanded versions of it that had acquired additional scenes that had hit the cutting room floor, and were adding those in. There's an edition out there that's got even some animation, drawings with additional voiceovers over the top of it that try to fill in the story, because so much was missing in Lynch's final cut, that they were trying to make those inexplicable gaps in the story understandable so that people could fill it in themselves. And there would be drawings with voiceovers, and of course when that version was released, I don't remember if it was released on a network originally or if it was just a DVD copy or whatever, but Lynch disassociated himself from that, and he took his name off of it, and and it became what's called an Alan Smithy film, which is a Hollywood name. When any director disavows the cut that is being used, he takes his name off of it, and then the Hollywood, it's a standard thing, you can look it up, and then it becomes an Alan Smithy film.
Now, because there were multiple, there was like a made for TV version of the film, and then there was a theatrical version, of course, and I think there were subsequent modifications to the theatrical film, like upon release on television or on VHS. Was the Alan Smithy inclusion for the theatrical film, or across the board, or was it for one specific cut of the film?
It was just it was a recut, an expanded edition using additional of Lynch's own, you know, scenes that had been cut. I don't, I don't know how they acquire those things, or how they acquired those additional scenes, or who did. I don't know any history there, but there was a version, and I have it on DVD. I actually a couple of different versions of DVDs in my collection of that longer cut that says Alan Smithy rather than David Lynch. But
was the theatrical? But was the theatrical release, was that credited to David Lynch upon?
Yeah, yes. The original theatrical was a David Lynch film.
That's okay, correct. Okay.
But that was the original 2-hour 15-minute head scratcher.
Right.
and of course, then there's a great documentary out there about the oh gosh, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce his name right, Jodorowsky or however you say his name. Anyway, the guy that was going to do an adaptation to Dune back in the 70s.
Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Let me I just have to get this right. And
yeah. Now that's because his take was more. I don't know too much about it, but I believe his take was a little more playing into the like psychedelic nature of the book. It coming out in the 70s. It's the alleged LSD influence of the book, and that Herbert might have used some of those experiences in writing the story of Dune.
Well, Jodorowsky's Dune, whatever. Just go watch if you're a Dune person, or you're even if you're just in your infancy in terms of your fandom of the Dune universe. It's worth watching. It's fascinating because he was going to have a completely, as you said, totally different adaptation. Very psychedelic. He had, I think he had Mick Jagger secured to play Paul Muad'Dib. One of my favorite, horror film artists is H.R. Giger, and he had Giger already doing the drawings and everything for the set design of this. And Giger was the one that ultimately was hired to do and design Alien. So all of that, of the Alien, spaceship and the aliens themselves, was designed by H.R. Giger. And so he had already, prior Alien, had already had Giger designing and doing the storyboards and all that kind of stuff on his vision. And so that would have been really interesting, especially as it related to the Harkonnen world and planet. But he had Salvador Dali, the artist, lined up to play the Padishah Emperor. He had Orson Welles lined up to play the Baron Harkonnen. Mick Jagger, I believe, was intended to be Paul Muad'Dib, and then some other named characters are famous actors from back there in that time. So he had quite a vision for that, and it just never. Bottom line is, it failed. It never came together. I actually am glad it didn't. It would not have been my based on his storyboarding and his vision. It would not have been my favorite version. And he was going to stray deliberately much further off of the path than either Lynch or Villeneuve did. So
I'm looking at concept art right now on my laptop here, and it honestly it looks like Star Wars. Honestly, I think this is a piece of concept. I'll put this up on screen for YouTube. But there's some concept art of what looks like Mick Jagger as Paul, in like a white cape and what looks like a sleeveless still suit. Definitely getting that H.R. Giger Alien influence. There's an image here of one of the sandworms. Fascinating. The only word I have is fascinating.
Bar from Star Trek.
Yeah.
Spock. Yeah, that is that's an interesting story in and of itself. I encourage everybody to just go get that documentary. You can pull it up probably on Amazon Prime or anywhere else.
Oh yeah, I'll
see
put that on my watch list because
Yeah,
I like you said, yeah, I'm in my infancy. I feel like with Dune, and um, just getting into it, reading the book, having conversations with you, it really is fueling my my love for the story, and just nice to. I mean, in our woke culture, it's just really nice to discuss something that is genuinely good and has been done well. At least as far as these new movies are concerned. I know there's some gripes you have, and I sort of agree with that. We'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, it's just really nice to you know, Star Wars, for a fan like me. Star Wars is dying a slow, painful death. Um, Star Trek's basically dead. There's just like there's not very many franchises out there that like it's fun to discuss anymore because there's just nothing good coming out of them. And Dune is a rare exception where it's this kind of this beacon of hope where it's like, oh, this is what it feels like to be a fan again, and to have discussions about lore and cultural influence and stuff like that, and pop culture. So
the
it's great.
interesting, yeah, the very, to me, the very satisfying, interesting thing about Dune is this resurgence of Dune now, but it's 60 years later. I mean, because even though the book came out in 65, one of the science fiction magazines serialized it in 63 and 64. Now, when it made it to its book form in 65, Herbert had rewritten a lot of it, but the original, I think it, again, this is another one of these things from my memory, but I think that it was originally serialized in about 6 or 8 chunks over the course of a couple of years worth of magazine publications. Those chunks were like basically an early edit of Dune. If you could find that, you can see what you'd be able to go back and see how much he changed or took out or added to or whatever. But essentially, the entire story was told before the book was published, and then he couldn't find a publisher because it was turned down by over. I mean, it was one of those typical stories you hear about great books that get turned down by dozens, if not 100 editors or publishers. I don't think it was 100. I think it was somewhere in the 20 range or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it was rejected over and over and over again. In fact, one of the large publishers even said something to the effect of, "I may be making a major career mistake here," or something to that effect, and by turning this down, but we're going to pass. And then this is the really crazy part. And I know you're too young to remember this, and I don't even know if this publisher still exists or if they even do this anymore. But when I was a kid growing up, every car that your dad bought, if it was a 66 Ford or a 70 Chevrolet or whatever, you bought what was called a Chilton manual to that book. So you could go, either from the dealership or you could go to a bookstore, and you could get the actual service manual for your car. Now, service manuals today don't exist. It's all electronic. It's all online. It's all computers. They even the mechanics diagnose your car by plugging in your car to the computer. It's the 30 computers in my car talking to their one computer, and then it tells you what's wrong with it. Well, back in the old days, before there were chips and computers in the cars, you had just all this analog stuff, and you had actual mechanical parts to fix. And so the Chilton series, and it didn't matter if it was a Datsun, if it was a Chrysler, if it was a Fiat, Chilton made a book for your car for that year, whatever you had, and it was a service manual, so you could fix it yourself if you so desired. And so the amazing part about the Dune story, and why I went to such effort to explain what Chilton is Chilton is the only publisher he could get to publish the original book. an auto service manual publisher was who published the first Dune. And then, as they say, the rest is history.
Wow.
It took off, and I saw a first edition sometime recently being advertised on, I don't know if it was eBay or whatever. Somebody had an actual first edition. They were selling it for like $28,000 or something like that. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And there's not many of them out there. I've never seen one. I've never seen a first edition, and I've looked. I've scoured for it. I mean, other than a seller like that, and I'm not going to pay $30,000 for a book.
Yeah.
I don't.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sure the price has gone up even more today.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good note to move on to our next points or our next question. So, as you mentioned, you're quite the Dune collector as well. Now, where did that start?
Well, that actually started after with that experience of traveling in the early '90s and reading all 6 books straight through. At that point, then, because I was on the road a lot, I spent quite a few years touring heavily and actually traveling internationally a lot. So one of the things that I've always done, and this was prior to my fascination with Dune or all things Frank Herbert in general, was that I like going into used bookstores and have always done that. And unfortunately, used bookstores don't hardly exist anymore. You can still find one here and there, but they used to be a big thing. It used to be, cool boutique used bookstores, and then there used to be like warehouse used bookstore size. They seem to all be. It seems to be a dying thing now because people sell their used books just like everything else. You buy your used books on eBay or somewhere else online. But the bottom line is that I used to go into these bookstores and so I would start seeing all of the original series with different covers, different editions. I would start buying those up because I could buy them cheaply in these used bookstores. Typically, $1 to $5 or something like that, and it was a cheap way to collect something that I liked, and then started expanding upon that. And then I started finding audio editions way before Audible. I mean, cassette audio editions, and not only cassette of the full book of Dune, but actual readings by Frank Herbert himself, reading chapters. So you could get a single cassette of him reading like 2 chapters of one of the books, so in his voice, and you got to learn how he pronounced those crazy words, in the index in the back of the book, and then going to other countries, I started buying them in the in the titles. Are titled in the language of wherever I was, whether it was Denmark or Sweden or Germany or wherever. And then of course, then I started the process of actually finding some of the more rare versions of them. And when I could afford them, I would buy them. So I remember being in a used bookstore in Glasgow, Scotland one time, and I actually found a signed first edition of hardback of Children of Dune, signed by, authenticated with Herbert's signature. And so I think I paid £100 for that 30 years ago ish, right at 30 years ago. And I think that I think that's probably, you could with the condition that book's in today, I think I could probably get a couple thousand for it, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
But
that's cool. That's
yeah.
that's special. The cassettes of Frank Herbert reading Dune specifically. That's got to be not just like price wise or the value of that, but just like that's an artifact. I mean, to have. I don't even think there's like anything of George Lucas. I mean, you have thousands of interviews of George Lucas out in the world, but like I don't think you can say there's anything even comparable to that of like George Lucas with Star Wars. I mean, I don't know, that's just really incredible to like have. I mean, my wife has a book of it's Twas the Night Before Christmas, and it's her grandparents reading it to her. Somehow they were able to get the voice chip every time you open a page, it's her grandparents reading the book, and like that's like a record of time of them reading that. And so it just, I don't know, just the general value of something like that, like that's really really special to have.
Yeah, and I today, because of the way merchandising is as it relates to movies and that sort of thing, there's so much more stuff available now on Dune, and I'm not collecting all of that. I want to collect the older stuff, and I'm really more interested in getting the books, whether they're paperback or hardcovers, in different editions, different versions, different covers. That fascinates me more than. And I, look, I'm really thankful as a and I don't consider myself a Dune expert, but I consider myself a Dune geek or nerd, and I'm really thankful that the book has exploded in popularity, because as soon as Villeneuve came out with Dune 1, that was, I mean, the book went to number 1 in every category again. In the months leading up to Dune 2, it went to number 1 in every category. So even with my misgivings about whether it's Lynch's version or the Sci-Fi Channel's miniseries version or Villeneuve's version, I'm thankful that more people are buying the book, because then if they're reading it and not just buying it, then they're really, they should be going, wow, this is because this isn't just great science fiction. It is the number 1 selling science fiction book of all time, but
Oh yeah, it's
great literature. It's my favorite, book. And then that introduced me to, as part of my collection, I started collecting all of Frank Herbert's other books and reading them. And so I have some of his other stories that I'm very partial to, that I think are definitely worthy of being made into films. 2 of them in particular, I know that studios have reserved as films, and yet they have still not come out. And one of them, I was really promoting heavily during the COVID lockdowns, early 70. Oh, maybe it was early 80. I think 81 or 82 was when he published a book called The White Plague, and it was the story of a genetically engineered bioweapon that was designed only to kill women, and it was a guy's revenge for a terror attack that killed his wife and child. And he was a molecular geneticist, biologist, engineer, and this guy designed a bioweapon to punish mankind. So he's not punishing man by destroying man. He's punishing men by depriving them of women, by releasing a bioweapon that's deadly only to women. And then the aftermath of that story is pretty incredible. But it's called The White Plague, and that's my second favorite book that Herbert ever wrote.
Wow, that's a wild and fascinating. Just that elevator pitch there, that's fascinating. In the Catholic world, we believe, to gaze on the beauty of a woman is to gaze upon heaven, and that's a fascinating idea. What happens when you take man's only tangible access to heaven?
Right.
I'll have to check that one out. I'm curious. Do you have this version of Dune?
What's that?
Do you have this version of Dune?
No, that's a later. Pull it over in front of you so I can see it there. Oh yeah. Oh, I don't have that. I don't have that cover. Mm-mm.
My version has it. It's like almost over 600 pages,
mm-hmm.
But the actual story ends at like 530 or something like that, and then there's just like calligraphy notes and like definitions and this whole expansive section on the world of Dune. Is that original to the book itself, or were those things added later on?
No, that's actually original. Herbert, or either that or his book publisher, knew that people were going to struggle with some of the names and definitions in the book. Look, as expansive as that first book is, it could have been at least 50% longer, if he had gone through the process of trying to weave those definitions into the narrative. And instead, he must have known he was going further with this story, because they did, or when I say he did, they did provide those basically those encyclopedic definitions at the end of the book. And the the funny thing is in the 1984 movie version of Dune that David Lynch did, if you were there opening day or opening night, or at least in the opening weekend, they actually those were a handout. And
no kidding.
Yeah, with the actual end notes in the book, the definitions of all of the particularly the more Islamic sounding verbiage, the Bene Gesserit and the Missionaria Protectiva and blah 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 blah. All of that was provided in a booklet form. I actually have a copy of it and in my collection, and that was kind of funny, because as confusing as the 1984 version of the movie was, because it had been cut to into oblivion. I mean, the general consensus is that Lynch filmed between 5.5 and 6 hours of the book, and it got cut down to 2 hours and 15 minutes. And if you weren't already familiar with the book, you probably if you didn't walk out of the movie, if you stayed through the whole thing, you were lost. And so they must have known that, and that's why they printed this, handout that you could get as you went into the theater. Except that you're in a dark theater, you can't read. Like you can't be thumbing through and figuring out what they're talking about in a dark theater. So it was just one of those. Another one of those debacles of the 84 story. But
the current like paperback novels of Dune, which they're okay titles, they're visually interesting, but I don't know, my wife and I, we have quite the book collection, and we want, like, if we can get like the hardcover or something that looks vintage or old, or just at the very least just like visually interesting. Like, I like this logo design here, designed by Alex Trosh. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name, but yeah, no, it's an interesting addition. But
so the old editions, even though look, unless you're willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars, you're never going to get a first edition. For first edition, first printing, it's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But you might find a first edition book club 9th printing or something like that, but even then it's going to be $500 to $2,000 depending upon the condition. I've seen one as much as $6,000. Well, I saw a signed one for $6,000. But
wow.
That was book club. That wasn't. And I have two book club first edition, first printings. So I don't know. I've never priced them. I don't know what they're worth. But if you go out there and start, you can still, you can get paperbacks reasonably, so getting 60s, 70s, 80s versions, which I think the art is infinitely better than the new versions that are out there on the bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you can find the hardbacks, if they're in good to, very good condition, they're going to be hundreds of dollars to acquire the old ones now. And that's because of the interest that's been generated by the new movies.
Yeah, no, it is really cool to see. So what is your favorite piece in your collection, and why?
Probably that piece that I got in Scotland, the signed version of Children of Dune. That's probably the most important thing that I have. I think and you know, I've never had the money or the resources to become a, you know, a big investment kind of collector. This was always just a fun hobby for me. It wasn't it wasn't something like that I was spending, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars on at all. But probably my favorite story about collecting was my acquisition of the um, first copy of the first edition book club that I acquired of Dune itself. And I was in a used bookstore back in Raleigh, North Carolina. Used to be called Lucy's. And essentially they would buy books from estate sales and wherever used bookstores used to buy books or whatever, but they buy them by the pallet load, they'd be brought in by the truck. And so then they would, they'd be stacked behind all of the counters, and then they these storage rooms, and then the clerks would go through them, and they would, if it was really interesting or really they thought it might be a rare collectible or something like that. And they were, the nerds that work in a bookstore are pretty booky, nerdy kind of people. So they know when they see something that maybe needs special attention, and they would set that off to the side for the owner to look at. And in this particular case, I wandered in to the bookstore, and as I was usually, my habit was, I walked right back to the science fiction section, went straight to the H's. This is a big place. And went to the Herbert section to see what had come in that I didn't have, that I could buy for $1 to $6 usually. I've never paid, didn't usually have to pay much more than that. Maybe 10 or 12 bucks for a hardcover that was in really great condition. And so on this particular day, I look up on the shelf, and the original first edition Dune, the dust jacket was almost identical to the book club version, or the book club version was almost identical to the first edition.
And just really quick, so in case people don't know, what is a book club version?
It's exactly what it's like. People back then used to sign up for a book club, and it was like so you sign up, and once a month, so you paid. This was like if you ever had a Columbia House. We used to have these record clubs. I don't know if you even were old enough to remember when those existed, but what happened is you would get an advertisement, and so you could get 13 or 16 books or records for $1, or for sometimes 1 penny. But then you had to sign up for a commitment to a full year's worth of books that they would charge you full price for. All right. So you would get a list. I mean, we had to fill these out by hand. So you'd get this long list of all these books. And so you'd go through and you'd check the boxes of the 12 or 13 or 16 books that you wanted. And then you would put your check for $1 or for 1 penny or whatever it was into an envelope, and you would mail it to them. Then all of a sudden you get a stack of books, and it'd be the book club books. But then even though you got that many for $1, you were now obligated for a year to conclude your contract of paying full price for your next 12 book club books or whatever. So that's what a book club was, basically.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. And so on this particular trip to Lucy's used bookstore, I went back to the Herbert section. I look up, and then all of a sudden I see in my, I kind of went flush because I'd seen pictures of it, never seen one before. I reached up there and grabbed it off the shelf and pulled it down, and it was not a first edition. It was a book club first edition. Oh, okay. I looked at the price. They used to, up in the top right-hand corner on the third page, they would write in pencil the price, and it said $6. And right there, I knew that was wrong. I knew enough. I'd been collecting long enough to know that was not a good price for that. It was way underpriced. And so I quickly grabbed about 3 or 4 other titles of covers off the shelf that I hadn't had, and put them on top of it. I grabbed 3 or 4 others and put it underneath it. And I walked up to the checkout counter, and the owner was at the register. and he knew me. I sat them down in the big stack of books, and he starts going through. He goes, "Okay, $3," and he enters that into the register. And next one, $4. He enters that in the register. $1. He puts that in the register, and then he gets to the one, and he paused and he hesitated because he knew it probably shouldn't have been back there. It should have been back in the special collectors part of the store. So he opened it up to page 3 and he looked at it and it said $6. And he just stared at it. And then he looked up at me and he said, "Are you going to hold me to this?" And I said, "Mm-hmm." And he just took a deep breath. He shook his head. He entered it into the register, closed the cover. And I said, "How did that happen? What happened?" And he said, "Well, we got a big shipment in. I saw it." He said, "I knew it was there. I told him to put it off to the side." He says, "I guess one of my guys messed up and it ended up on the shelf marked at 6." So the quality of the edition I got, this was over 25 years ago or so. It was probably $500 then, and it's certainly gone up since then. As I said, I've seen them, in poor condition, $500, good condition, very good condition in 2,000, 3,000 range. And then, as I said earlier, I saw this one signed version in good condition that was a price at 6,000.
Wow.
For the book club. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. What a great story. We talked quite a bit about David Lynch's 84 Dune, but what are your general thoughts on that movie?
General thoughts are actually more favorable than most people would assume they would be. Let me tell you what. Look, if I write a short paragraph criticizing either Lynch or Villeneuve, I get savage. People, you open up a flame war. People are very defensive about their own personal feelings and beliefs about an adaptation. I've been accused of. I had somebody when I was commenting on a Villeneuve thread just here a few days ago, and he said, "Tell me you don't know what an adaptation is without telling me you don't know what an adaptation is." It's like, God, man,
that's ridiculous.
That's the internet today. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me just tell you what this is my opinion. Nobody should get offended by this. This is my opinion. I'll tell you what I think Lynch got right. I'll tell you what I think he got wrong. All right. I think, first of all, he should have been more aggressive at his ability to dictate the final cut. And from what I understand and what I've read is that Dune is the only movie he ever did where he did not have in his contract the right to final cut. And he was at that day, he was dealing with some big money, big family, big producer. And I guess for whatever reason, he wanted to do that bad enough that he gave up that right to final cut. And that's exactly what happened. I think that the first version would have come in at over 3 hours, or because he filmed somewhere between 5 to 6 hours of footage, that he might have, had he had his choice, been able to do what Villeneuve did and split it into 2. Because Villeneuve, he put his foot down. He was not doing it unless he could split the movie up. Now, he took a risk because he did part 1 without part 2 ever being greenlit. In other words, funded.
And part 2 being book 2 or part 2 of book 1? Part 2
of book 1. Yeah,
okay.
Part 2.
He was going to do what Denis Villeneuve did.
Yeah, I think he would have. I think he would. But the bottom line is, even back then, the movie theaters were very resistant at a 3-hour film. Now, I mean, we get 3-hour films thrown at us all the time, and we kind of like it, which is kind of unusual, because back in the old days, look, I grew up in an era where a 2-hour movie, you got a 15-minute intermission so people could go buy popcorn and use the restroom.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know. I don't know what the problem is there. I mean, if you're resistant to a 3-hour film, boom, throw the music on for 15 minutes with more advertisement and whatever, and let people take a break.
I agree. I Lawrence of Arabia is one of my favorite movies, and that movie is like 3 hours. But I love it. And
Yeah,
my parents raised me on Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments and
yeah.
all these epics that are 3+ hours long. So I agree with you. It doesn't matter how long the movie is, as long as the
And
story is
all of
maintained.
them,
Put an intermission in there. What's the problem?
every one of those movies you named right there, originally in their theatrical release, had an intermission.
Mm-hmm.
They all
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
I don't know what the problem is, but obviously they've run the numbers. There must be some economic, reason for that, but I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, what I think that Lynch got right is I enjoy, when I read just the raw Dune without the influence of any outside influence of visuals, I think that Dune, Lynch's version in '84, had a better feel for the juxtaposition between the medieval culture, political culture, societal culture, and the feel for the limited technologies. Now, neither adaptation really explained to us why Dune is such a unique universe, in that it's 25,000 years into our future, not 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
The book and the movie start out by saying, we're in the year 10,191. That's not 10,191 AD. That's 10,191 years after the Butlerian Jihad. And the Butlerian Jihad is when humans, which had been scattered throughout the universe by this time, were able to overthrow AI and the thinking machines. And they had been at war for thousands of years at this point. And so 10,191 is actually 15,000 years into our current future. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Then another 10,000 years is where that story picks up. And the net result of that is that human beings, were now having to learn how to substitute 10,000 plus, 15,000 plus years of computers and their reliance upon computers, AI, thinking machines, robots that could do everything for them, including calculating, dangerous interstellar travel
Mm-hmm.
at warp speeds or whatever, folding space. And so what it forced humanity into do was to accelerating their development through genetic inbreeding, or breeding, and then they developed what they call the great schools.
Okay, so that's our interview. That, at least that's the first half of our interview. Thankfully, there's more to come with my interview with Steve Baker on the rise of Dune. I gotta say, one of my favorite facts that he talked about is the Chilton Auto Manual, and that company, Chilton, was the company that decided to publish Dune, and that Dune had this rise to success, all from being published by a company that created car manuals. It's just such a fascinating nugget of history, as far as Frank Herbert and how he got Dune made. So many more nuggets, so many more fascinating stories from Steve coming up in the second half of this interview that I had with him. Until then, guys, please again consider supporting Steve by following his work on The Blaze, following him on Twitter, and I'll put his links in the description of this episode so you guys can follow him and support him. And on that note, please consider supporting this podcast. Please subscribe, like the episode, share a comment if you have your own Dune stories. If you liked the episode, if you didn't like the episode, and if you subscribe to this channel, you get to see more episodes of the Vince Salerno Podcast, past episodes, future episodes, occasional short films. I haven't really done many short films recently, but there's stuff in the works that I hope to share with you guys someday. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, so much for listening. I really appreciate you guys. Have a great day. We'll see you next time for part 2. God bless, and peace out.